Good morning. My name is Ada Skiles, and I'm the Associate Director at Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago. On behalf of Chapin Hall, I would like to welcome you to our Child and Family Policy Forum. We would like to thank those of you who are here in person and those of you who are attending through our video webcasts. Today's program is entitled Beyond School Improvement, Partnering to Strengthen Educational Opportunities for Urban Children and Youth. I know you will find today's discussion both lively and informative. Moderating our panel of experts is Matt Stagner, the Executive Director of Chapin Hall. Again, thank you very much for participating in our discussion and program today. I will now turn the program over to Matt, who will introduce our panel.
Thank you, Ada, and welcome again to all of you here at the Gleacher Center, as well as those of you who are online. We have over 300 people or places signed up online, as well as folks here in person. We're very excited about this panel. It touches on a topic that Chapin Hall has been concerned about throughout the course of its 25-year plus history. Schools are important institutions in communities. We expect a lot of them, and it is the view of Chapin Hall that we don't spend enough time thinking and understanding how other community institutions, whether those are public or private institutions in the community, can partner with schools to achieve what we hope schools can achieve. Lisa Walker of Chapin Hall will be our first speaker. Lisa has been worried about this topic for some time and involved in a number of initiatives at Chapin Hall, worried about partnerships, schools, and how we can help urban children. Lisa is a senior researcher at Chapin Hall, and we're very pleased with her, and it is her vision that brought together this panel. We're also very pleased to have two guests. Our first speaker after Lisa will be Larry Sachs. Larry's the Director of Grants Management Research and Development Division at the Chicago Police Department, and we'll be speaking about school partnerships from that angle. And then we have invited from St. Louis, from Washington University in St. Louis, Vicki May, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for School Partnership. So you can tell why we invited her from the title of the Institute. So the way this works, we will have each of our speakers kick off the discussion. We will leave plenty of time to have both questions from the audience here and back and forth discussion, as well as an exchange with people online. There are three ways that those of you online can contact us. You can use the Twitter hashtag Chapin Forum. You can post questions on the UChicago Live Facebook page, or send an email to policyforum@chapinhall.org. So I will try to weave in and moderate a discussion that involves both our local audience as well as our audience out there in internet land. So with that, I will turn it over to Lisa to begin.
Good morning. The discussion paper that you received in your packet today is about partnerships between schools and their local communities in particular. In it, my colleagues and I try to raise questions for policymakers and administrators about the purposes and challenges of these partnerships and what they can do to support their development. In this forum, we'll focus on partnerships more broadly to include public agencies and community institutions. Partnering to improve educational outcomes is a huge topic. There are notable examples of partnerships here in Chicago. Community schools is one. Promise Neighborhoods is another. We hope we've attracted people who are involved in partnerships to this forum, and that we'll hear your grounded perspectives on the work, promise, and challenges of partnerships during the discussion period. I'm going to start today by making the case for partnerships from a research and policy perspective. Larry Sachs and Vicki May will each talk about their insights into partnerships based on their work. So, what does beyond school improvement mean? After all, isn't improving our schools really, really important, and one of the most important things we need to accomplish? Well, in education, we made a major shift 30 years ago. We started focusing on the effectiveness of schools rather than their ineffectiveness in the face of poverty. And for a generation, ideas about effectiveness have focused our attention on the school and what practitioners can do to improve schooling for low-income minority children and youth. We've lived out these ideas through a variety of policies and investments, and we've developed them through research. But when we focus on school improvement, the boundaries of the school tend to define the boundaries of our thinking and conversation. In light of the life challenges of urban minority children, the journalist Paul Tough encourages us to talk about poverty separately from the potential of schooling to overcome poverty. But the topic of poverty has been divisive in the educational research community, and this makes it hard to have productive conversations about it. On the one side are the cold, hard facts of data that associate social factors with educational outcomes. And on the other side is the determination to improve those educational outcomes through practical knowledge of schools and teachers and innovations to make them better. And what's missing in between is a common conversation. Now, one thing I've learned from practitioners, that's from literary coaches, I've learned that it's possible to make progress in difficult conversations about a teacher's practice by focusing on the children they teach, using evidence to understand the strengths and needs of those children. So focusing on the children may be one bridge across the divide, and there may be another. Researchers who have been committed to improving schools for urban children have found that learning is a product of learning experiences. It's not a product of family income or associated hardships. But it is also the case that social scientists have consistently found that experiences outside school contribute more to educational outcomes than schooling itself. The conversation we need to start having is about how to strengthen children's learning experiences, not only in schools, but also in and with the support of community institutions and families. I would like to emphasize the idea of learning experiences. Even school reform efforts have not been sufficiently focused on these. So, we've been asking for 30 years how we can improve our schools, and we've made progress in understanding this. Looking forward, in light of the social and health challenges of urban children, and in light of the fact that learning can take place inside and outside of school, we must ask how we can coordinate and improve programs, services, and resources across multiple institutions and agencies to strengthen educational opportunities for urban children and youth. I would now like to present a few slides that take children and youth as the starting point for our thinking rather than the school. After I present the slides, I will talk briefly about a principal who feels that she and her staff would do better to serve students on their own, and why this is actually an argument for partnerships. So why start here with children and youth? Well, one reason is we must be concerned about how to support them so they benefit from the school improvements we're making. Also, we must be concerned that school improvement efforts might harm some children or not really help them at all. And if we don't focus on them, we might not see this. Now, in focusing on children and youth, our concerns are for their health and safety, their positive development, and their preparation to succeed in college or career training. Educational prospects cannot be separated from these concerns. We have to take all of them on. Children and youth are inseparable from their families, and multiple institutions and organizations provide services to children and/or their families, or have the potential to influence them. So how can all of these entities contribute to educational experiences, and particularly learning experiences? We need to be as concerned about this question as we have been about the improvement of our schools. And once you have so many organizations involved, you've got a lot on your hands to think about and figure out how to make that work. Here are the words of the principal of a school in the middle of aggressive improvement efforts. This principal has the urgency and commitment for change that school reformers want to see in practitioners. She finds the services and resources available through other agencies lacking, or their perspective on her students unsupportive. She and her staff want to take care of the children themselves inside the school. She says, "We know resources to call, but they are so overbooked that they don't really have the time, and if they do, it's not digging in deep enough to really help that kid enough as possible." Or the kid goes to Hartgrove, which is a psychiatric hospital, and they're not eliciting the behaviors here. Well, because it's fun for them. They're not in school for 6 hours a day. You're not saying to them, do your math problem, do your reading problem, sit next to this kid who has ADHD, and sit next to this kid who has a hearing problem. Sit next to that kid who didn't bathe and smells, and sit next to that kid who says the cat peed on his clothes again. And then you have all those things, and then have your math worksheet to do. So yes, we have support, but no, we don't. We use each other, primarily here, as resources. So we're really good about the resources here, so it's like we need a little nonprofit agency in here that helps us deal with the problem specifically. But the principal and her staff don't really have the training for this work, and they shouldn't be spending their energy this way. The principal told me the day I talked to her that she had spent an hour physically restraining a child to prevent the child from harming herself. It would be the role of partnerships to make sure the child and the family receive services to prevent this child's volatile episodes at schools. The educators need to be able to educate. I don't mean to say the principal is at fault, although we should note that she doesn't expect of other agencies what is expected of her, which is to be effective. In this case, the fault is with the coordination of the larger systems around her students. So education is a leading issue for our society. We all know this. It's one in which multiple agencies and institutions can play a role. However, the leadership for this kind of effort must come from the education sector, or we won't make enough progress. And it must broaden beyond the goal of school improvement to focus on the educational pathways of children. Larry Sachs will now talk about his insights into the partnering work of the police department, and Vicki May will follow up to talk about the partnering work of a major university. Thank you.
Good morning. I want to start by thanking Chapin Hall for giving us the opportunity to be here to talk about this important topic. I'm very pleased and flattered to have been invited. What I want to try and do is share with you some of the methods we use to try and help our children be safe, feel safe, and succeed in school through what I'll call traditional partnerships with schools and less traditional partnerships with schools and with communities. Along the way, I'm going to talk in depth about a couple of examples of non-traditional partnerships we've created that are, I think, somewhat groundbreaking and innovative, that I hope you'll find interesting. and along the way also give you some lessons learned and some insights that we have developed that help us work more effectively with our partners around student issues. I started off trying to understand what I wanted to say and what it meant, and found myself asking a really basic question: why do all these partnerships even matter? And I read something in an Adler School publication that I'm going to paraphrase. A sense of connectedness with school and family reduces nearly every health risk behavior, including violence, drug and alcohol abuse, suicidal thoughts, and emotional distress. And I think that that connectedness, if children experience it with parents, with families, and with schools, will have the opposite sort of effects, and they will do well in school, and they'll develop careers, and they'll become good parents themselves and good community members. And so I think that's the connection for me in terms of why we're asking the question, why do we need a lot of partners around this work? Because we all need to be working to help these kids be connected in school to their families and to their communities. We see a lot of evidence when kids are not connected. And in fact, I've got some data to give you kind of a graphic explanation here in Chicago of what that can look like. Chicago Police, on an annual basis, so this is 2011 data, we picked up 35,000 truants. I contend that's probably a very small number of the kids that were truant from school, but still a large number. Chicago Police Department effected 3,885 arrests on school property. Schools call police, make calls for service. Police respond. Sometimes they arrest kids. We did that nearly 4,000 times last year. We picked up 21,000 curfew violators in 2011. There were 707 juveniles in Chicago that were shot. Of those, 66 were 14 years of age or younger. 83 were killed. 226 of the 707 that were shot came from just 9 high schools. And I contend that a lot of these kids that are truant, that are out late when they shouldn't be, they're involved in activities that lead to them being shot, are very disconnected from schools, from families, from communities. And that's why we need partnerships to do something about that. There's an awful lot that we do, the Chicago Police Department, that some of it's fairly visible. We have traditional partnerships in support of school safety. And to give you some examples, we've used Department of Justice COPS grants to install X-ray machines so that schools can make sure kids aren't carrying weapons onto school property, and handheld wands for the same purpose, X-ray wands. We assign police officers to schools. In fact, we have 154 officers working in 78 high schools in the city of Chicago. We have 54 mobile patrols whose entire job is to focus on school safety. And they respond primarily to the 684, I think, schools that don't have officers on grounds. We have truancy enforcement, as I mentioned. We have quite a mechanism to help kids get out of school safely. Some of you have seen school dismissal. What it looks like is school officers assigned to those schools, plus the public safety staff from CPS, plus mobile patrols from the district and other resources swarm the school around dismissal time to help get the kids out and into the community and down those travel paths safely. It's quite an operation. We also work with schools and do joint training and de-escalating conflicts. We do active shooter training in some high schools, trying to avoid one of those terrible Columbine-type situations. And of course, we make millions and millions of calls for service to Chicago schools. It's the calls for service, I think, that led a group of gang enforcement officers into a very interesting idea. They got a bit tired, I think, of just responding to calls and arresting kids, realizing that there might be more they could do. So they have created some new partnerships with school personnel, with juvenile probation staff, and they go into these schools and they do interventions trying to keep violence from escalating. They mine social media looking for intel to help them understand when conflicts are brewing. Schools notify them as well. And they go into a school as a team And they'll do motivational interviewing with the kid. They'll do needs assessment with the kid. They'll do cognitive therapy, brief cognitive therapy with the kid, trying to help them get a different perspective on what's possible for them. And they'll refer for services. They'll involve the families of the kids in some cases, the peers of the kids. It's problem solving in a very significant way. Our gang school safety teams have intervened in over 1,700 such situations since March 2010. They tell me they only know of 3 instances after their interventions concluded in which the kids they worked with got engaged in some violence. That's not a pure fact. That's just what they think. That's what they know. And the thing that I wanted to share with you, these are tough street cops. And their typical response when they arrive on a scene is people treat them like tough street cops and don't want to see them coming. They don't feel welcome. They have to put on their game face. They're cops. They're there to arrest people and control the scene. In contrast, these tough street cops have turned into social workers in a very real sense. They love this work they're doing. They are just in love with this work. The schools are in love with the work that they're doing, and they love seeing them coming. A lot of these kids trust them. They know that they've got great street cred. They're reaching out beyond these interventions, asking them for help with disassociating from the gangs. It's a very, very successful, very non-traditional program. We are engaged in other non-traditional partnerships to help kids do well in school. I'll mention a few. We have the largest gang resistance education training program in the country. We've had 200-300 officers going through 40-hour training to be certified to teach this evidence-based curriculum, which works in middle schools to teach kids how to make good decisions, how to avoid negative peer influences, how to set goals and reach them. We've created a juvenile intervention and support center, which processes over 5,000 juvenile arrests in Chicago per year. We work with the Department of Family and Support Services and with community agencies, the goal being to divert kids from court and detention whenever possible. That whole process has resulted in a serious reduction in the number of kids that are referred to court. We think keeping kids out of the system whenever possible is good. The more they're in the system, the more they get stuck in the system. We work with 10 community agencies to help us keep alcohol out of the hands of minors. It's called our SAM, our Stop Alcohol to Minors program. They actually provide us some funding to do party patrol activities and compliance checks at liquor establishments. Our community policing program provides community volunteers with equipment and vests to help keep travel routes for elementary schools safe. We're working right now on a very interesting program with Chicago Public Schools, with Department of Family Support Services, with PowerPack. If any of you are familiar with Chicago Social Services, you might know PowerPack. It's an organization that's very, very good at involving parents in school business. And with Community Justice for Youth Institute, we're going to be working in 4 high schools, trying to create peace rooms, using restorative justice principles and practices, community volunteers, training students to run circles, to do 2 things. One, education on how to avoid conflicts from escalating, and when conflicts are happening, to give those kids intervention possibilities in school settings. A few years ago, we realized that a lot of the community organizations we'd like to partner with that have tremendous desire to help these troubled communities in Chicago just didn't have much capacity to meet their goals. And we decided that we had an opportunity to do something about that. Now we're moving away from the traditional, non-traditional school police partnerships more into community partnerships. We decided to create a program of services to build the capacities of community agencies. We called it CPDs, a force for good, meaning obviously that these organizations and their members could be a force for good in the communities they serve. We developed an advisory board, so we brought in more partners to help us develop what we thought were our initial good ideas. You know, and I'm not moving through the slides, am I? Sorry. All right, well, Slides are so good, too. Sorry. So we brought in people from government and from community. I'll just kind of tab through so at least you have a quick look at them, and they'll be on this site, I think. We have public health, Chicago Housing and Economic Development. We had the mayor's office. We had LISC, which is Local Initiative Support Corporation, Good City, Chicago Area Project, and the Donors Forum working with us to take the good ideas and shape them up and make them even better. We collaboratively developed a three-phase, two-year program to support these community organizations. We believe very much in a tell, show, do kind of an approach to training people. You don't just tell people what to do. You show people how to work, and then you do it with them, and you learn together from their mistakes and your feedback. So the first phase is an academic and skills training set of classes that we held at one of our district stations. And the second phase of the program is a full organizational assessment conducted by Good City to help these organizations understand the relative strengths and weaknesses. And we're just about complete with those two phases. We held 13 classes through the Donors Forum. Several of those classes we taught ourselves. We brought the superintendent and our bureau chiefs into contact with our member organizations to let them interact. We wanted the organizations to understand the police better. We wanted the police leaders to understand these organizations better. And we're getting ready to move into the third phase, which is mentorship. We're starting that in January. We're going to do group mentorship and individual mentorship using the weaknesses and deficits that were portrayed from the organizational assessments to do project-based mentoring, meaning we want the mentors and the organizations to pick very concrete, very real products so they can produce together some very real outcomes in a 6-month period. It's not just theoretical or talk, but to actually produce some outcomes. We started off the whole program with a press conference the mayor held. We advertised. We had 94 organizations apply. We selected 35. The advisory board used an objective process to determine which organizations we would accept. All of the organizations serve communities that have higher than average rates of violence. All of the organizations have been in existence for 3 years or longer. None of them are so large that they are already kind of fully capable of meeting their mission. 18 of the 35 have a direct mission to serve youth in their communities. And one of the things we've tried to do in bringing these organizations together is to give them opportunities to support each other and to create a community of not-for-profits, if you will, that can help each other. It's not just about us or a Good City or a Donors Forum having the expertise. They have their own expertise and can share with each other. And we've encouraged them to take on some joint projects. We've created a website for them. We've posted almost 300 unique grant opportunities that they wouldn't have known about. We're helping them apply for those grants. We're doing surveying. Many of them have applied for grants. Many of them have formed new partnerships through the Force for Good program that they didn't have before. Many have reported improved attitudes toward the Chicago police. Some of you might not know, but not everybody loves the Chicago Police Department. And we've seen some real evidence of movement in the right direction because they understand where we're coming from. We want to help them help their communities. We're looking to the next go-around for Force for Good and probably going to do another citywide sometime next fall. We're also imagining the opportunity to do a second type of a Force for Good and to focus on one community and maybe bring in all of the not-for-profits in that one community in a much more geographically intact area to work together and to build a coalition to do the things that that community needs done, which is really a step beyond partnership. You know, it's bringing partners together and going a step beyond and forming coalitions with common purposes, which is something that I think we should be pursuing. I'll just say one more thing in conclusion. This is sort of a lesson learned. This shouldn't surprise any of you. The worst thing any of us can do, especially those of us in government, is to go into a community and sit down and tell them what they need and what we're going to do for them. We just can't do that. It's a big turnoff for them, and you get nowhere. The approach we use, and it works, is you sit down with folks, you engage in conversation, you drop the egos, you ask them what's going on, what do they need help with, how do they feel about it, and you just begin to brainstorm and develop ideas that way. And that's the way we do community organizing, trying to develop partnerships in support of the kids, being better connected to schools, families, communities, so in turn they do well in school, so in turn they do well in life. And I'll turn this over to Vicki.
Thank you.
Hello, I too want to say thank you to Chapin Hall for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the work we're doing at Washington University in St. Louis and just the way we're trying to think about partnering and being a partner. Often, universities as a community partner, brings about certain kind of ways of thinking about how we do the work. And what we're doing is really trying to approach this work differently. But universities are a really largely untapped resource in terms of a community partner. If you think about the resources at a university, our faculty and their expertise is amazing. Our students have an amazing amount of energy. And so when you put those things together and channel them, I think we have amazing possibilities. They also, higher ed institutions in general are place-based. So the success of our university is very intertwined and dependent on our community and on our community schools. So we have an economic stake in this game. So every university should be at the table. Also, just thinking about the work of universities and solving complex problems and building knowledge, we have an ethical and a moral obligation to be at the table. But all of you who have been working with partnerships know that this is not easy work. This is time-consuming work, is very challenging, and we have to really acknowledge the fact that our cultures are quite different. So walking into any partnership, it's really crucial to kind of think about what are the cultures of the 2 institutions or the 5 institutions you're trying to work with, and how do you bridge those differences. One of the things that I have learned over the couple decades that I've been doing this work is that there is a power differentiation whenever you walk from a university into a K-12 school. There's this kind of traditional hierarchy where everybody blames the person before them. And so it's kind of working through those differences, thinking about when you walk in, really the conversation and the dialogue to put you both at the same level on the playing field. We also have very different timelines. The university tends to think about globally about the work that we do, and the universities do, but the schools are very localized. They care about the here and now and what's happening in the school today. And they aren't really very interested in studying something to death and then writing a report a year later about what happened. So we have to kind of bridge that and talk about how do you make these things win-win for everyone involved. Some of the real practical timelines. Sometimes the most work needs to be done when the faculty and the students are not in session. And so finally, when we started looking at how to really look at resources and bring resources to our K-12 partnerships, you realize that the university is organized in these silos of expertise, but the work of solving complex problems in education is an interdisciplinary kind of approach is needed, and we need to be able to have people who can look at different expertise and blend them and work between them. So we did, at Washington University, create this Institute of School Partnerships. And in the Institute, the work has been really trying to say, what is our best practices in partnership? How do we build an institute that will really be able to facilitate not only the university working with schools, but other community partners coming in and working with the schools. We have a number of resources at the Institute of School Partnerships in terms of personnel. You really have to have the right people for this work. You need to have people who have some experiences in the K-12 setting and who understand teaching and learning, curriculum, instruction, and assessment. But you also need people who understand organizational structure at a deep level, building trust, and at sort of this whole idea of other services that will support children and their families and really look at engagement of families. So we do work, the provost is really leading this effort through the Institute. We have all of the schools, the Brown School of Social Work, the Olin Business School, the Law School, Arts and Sciences is all at the table. Our education department is under our Arts and Sciences, so the partnering, even within one institution, is challenging, is to try to get all of the schools and all of the people lined up working in the same direction and coordinating this effort. So we really decided that having some strong organizational and governance structures, both internally and when we work with the schools. The other lesson learned is really about resources. If you have a institute that is dependent on grants, primarily grants and contracts, then basically you have an agenda coming in. You really are working on the agenda to make sure those happen. But if you begin the work really saying that there are resources to put toward the partnership, to put toward the work of the school and the needs of the schools, then you can say that the grants can come in and fill the gaps where you identify them. But there does need to be some resources initially put very directly in the partnership work. We've found that there needs to be really constant awareness of the change process and honor that. There are people who jump into change quickly. There are people who get their toes wet and then they jump in, and there are ones that actually you bring dragging and screaming or they leave. You know, that whole change process, being aware of what is happening and recognizing that is important. And finally, this whole idea of really recognizing, setting benchmarks for success. How do you tell if you are going in the right direction? How do you tell if you are making a difference in the schools? And I think setting benchmarks and short-term goals, rather than saying, you know, we're going to do school improvement and that means a final goal of achievement on a test. You know, how do we look and agree on successes before that and also celebrate those? The other thing that we want to think deeply about is, as we start working in the schools as a university, how do we approach the work in a way that's very deliberate? So we have been using a design-based implementation research approach, and I really believe that this has the potential to help think about how to bridge the world of policy, research, and practice. If we are able to take a very deliberate approach, really illuminate what happens in these partnerships, think about the problem-solving approach, I think that a continuous improvement model is really what will come out of this work. The design-based implementation research has 4 common elements. There's a persistence on the problems of practice. So it is not that the university faculty member thinks they want to go in and teach genetics to high school kids. There is a place for that, but this work is really about a focus of school change. So the problems that we want to address are the problems that are persistent problems in schools. We are very interested in a collaborative design that, you know, the theory of action should come from the practitioners, the policymakers, and the researchers together, and have a theory of action that is iterative. We design, we work, and we do a lot of reflection. and we do that jointly. The theories that are developed should be not only about the classroom learning or the student support, but it should be also about the implementation. So we care about the what, but more importantly, we care about the how and the why. Finally, as a university and as the director of the Institute, we're not really interested in thinking of ourselves as technical assistants, although that we do that. We're not really interested in thinking of ourselves as consultants, but we really want to be partners. And to be partners means that you're really thinking about capacity building and sustainability. So in the school systems we work with, there's a real focus on what are you doing to build the capacity within the system. One of our projects is very closely associated with our middle school in University City. And University City has we have a long history of that, working with them. It began sort of as volunteer efforts, but about 3 years ago, they came to us and said, we're very interested in a middle school redesign. Can you help plan and work with us on that? So as we began, University City Middle School has about 650 students. It's 90% African American, 75% free and reduced lunch. It had had 5 principals in 6 years when we began working with them. And it was on the list of the worst 25 schools in the state. So it's not a list you want to be on. They really had a lot of turnover and lack of continuity and dysfunction in the school system. So as we started working, the administration laid out sort of the 5 pillars of reform that they wanted to work on with curriculum and assessment and professional development. And we really stood back and said, we'd like to spend a year working with you and deciding what we want to work on together and what a redesign process would look like. And we spent that year doing a lot of partnership building, a lot of trust, being responsive to small needs as they came up, but really developing and weaving together a common foundation and theory for the work. We have been doing this work now for 3 years, and I would say we have a number of successes. We have the same principal who we love. She's excellent, and I think that's the first goal is leadership. We also have parents who feel like the communication is open and finally very transparent. We have students who feel like they have a voice, and there are times that they're very engaged. After-school programming is now in place, and the summer school, they have a selection that has been based on their recommendations about courses they can take. We also have teachers who are meeting together once a week in collaborative groups to help think about instruction. We have data that can help inform their instruction, and one of the things we're really looking at in terms of looking at theory is what is the impact of a very embedded professional development model, where as you sit with the collaborative groups, you're providing the professional development and you have school leaders providing that. When you look at the use of data, we tend to say teachers should use evidence-based practice, but what does that mean and how does it work? And what data do they find interesting and important to guide their instruction? And also, if you think about both at University City and the charter school we support, which is KIP, and you look at academic achievement and serving the students that are in the most need, what are the non-academic supports that mediate the success of the child? So we just feel that at the university, it really comes often down to the same things that all the decisions in life are about, are sort of the strategies of managing people, time, and resources, right? But with so many resources and hopes devoted to these partnerships, the stakes are high. And at the university, we want to say that we are committed to doing the real work in the schools, with the principals, with the teachers, and with the schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have about 45 minutes for conversation on the meaty issues that Lisa, Larry, and Vicki have laid out. Again, for those of you watching us on the web or are able to get to us through Twitter or email with your questions. Meanwhile, we will take questions from the audience here at the Gleacher Center. We have people roaming with microphones. So if you do have a question or comment, just raise your hand. Someone will come to you with a microphone. And if you could introduce yourself and your affiliation, that would be very helpful. So we will start over here.
Okay, good morning. My name is Alejandra Ibanez. I'm a program officer at the Oak Park River Forest Community Foundation. I'm also a former organizer and nonprofit partner at a community school in Chicago in Pilsen. And one of the questions and lessons learned that I'm still learning, that I'm going to ask for some nuggets of advice, is developing shared language and shared benchmarks. So I remember being in Pilsen, and we were a nonprofit partner with Whittier School for about 5 years. I think we spent the first 2 years speaking 2 different languages. So I, as an organizer and a nonprofit, with a principal who had her own challenges. You know, her school was at risk of being closed for under-enrollment. Our school was being gentrified. So we were on the same page, but we weren't on the same page. And it took us 2 years to really be intentional and figure out how we could support one another in a way that was going to support the larger school community. And so that, I felt like I lost 2 years there, that we were doing things, good things, but our after-school program didn't necessarily support or wasn't in line with what was happening in the classroom. And then what we were doing in the school, within the walls, wasn't as intentional with what was happening outside of those 4 walls in the community. And so I walked away from that experience feeling that I had learned a lot, but knowing that it takes so much work in developing a shared language. Now in Oak Park River Forest, we're developing a continuum of learning from birth to high school, and are trying to get everyone around the table. And one of the challenges is for us to, again, create a shared language, shared outcomes, shared benchmarks. We all use different verbiage. And then there's also different types of theories, whether it's the child psychologist, the teachers, the police department. And so I would love to hear some nuggets of advice of how you, in your work, got to overcome our different language and came up with benchmarks. And I'll add one more piece. One of the challenges that I'm trying to be very mindful of is our school districts who have enough microscopes on them about accountability. The last thing they want is for us to put another layer of accountability and how to get over that. Sorry if I packed it on, sorry.
These are complex issues with lots of angles, and you raise a number of them. And I noted that 2 of our speakers, at least, maybe all 3, mentioned the difference of cultures. And I guess I would ask Larry to begin, because it seems that the police in many ways have the most different initial culture and need to think, as he mentioned, about how they then build a partnership.
You know, in listening to you, quickly thought of a piece of advice, which is to have somebody from outside sitting in, watching and observing with a very different perspective than any of you participants have. You know, someone from Chapin Hall doing a process evaluation, if you will, that's watching for these language barriers and difficulties in people working together. Somebody whose job really is just for that conversation to be functional and effective. That's the only advice I have.
Vicki, did you want to reflect on this question?
Well, I'll just say ditto. It is very much so the initial work of the partnership. And it isn't about it's really about building the tapestry together, right? And the only way I know to do that is to spend the time up front. It's either pay me now or pay me later. So you sort of want to spend that upfront time and say, what are the goals? And around that, I think we're trying to look at measurable benchmarks. And as we started trying to put that on paper, if I wrote it and brought it in, everybody said yes. And that was the end of the discussion. But if we find that we write those together and then really spend that time developing the outcomes that we're looking for and what is the evidence that we see it happening, and we wrote our logic model. When that happened, the language difficulties, and especially around, Chapin Hall came in and helped us for the past year and a half. And in areas that I was less familiar with, they were able to say, well, this is teen leadership development, this is health services, and there's really 5 fields in what you're calling non-academic social supports. And having that expertise to help me tease out what am I talking about here, and how do I help tease out and open up the discussion was really helpful. So I also advocate sort of this process piece. And then in terms of accountability, again, that building that logic model, we really are committed that all of the data we use is the school data. It's the school data that they're really interested in collecting and that they want to reflect on and that they're held accountable for. They write papers with us. They're active researchers. So that way we're not putting another sort of, we do interviews and observations and things of that sort, but the data and the evidence base and the accountability is really from the school end of things. I hope that helps.
Lisa, did you want to add to that?
Well, I'd actually like to throw it out to the audience a little bit. Since this is supposed to be a discussion, I know Lauren Rich of Chapin Hall has worked on an evaluation of, a community school partnership, and I'm wondering if, so I'm just wondering of other people who can address this issue of common language and how to come to a place where you are speaking the same language so you can make progress.
Good.
Okay. No.
Lauren, did you?
I guess I would just say
Wait for the microphone.
I guess I would just say ditto to what Larry and Victoria said. I agree. I mean, I think the issues that the questioner was raising is just work that has to be done at the beginning. I don't think there's any easy way to do it. And I also think that having an outside person to help guide that process is probably helpful as well. I also like the fact that Victoria mentions involving the community groups or the partnership in actually doing the research as well, sort of action research. So I think that's a positive approach as well.
Good. We have a question in the back there.
Hi, my name is Madeline James. I'm with Voices for Illinois Children. I was struck, Larry, by a couple of things. One, you mentioned that there are 9 high schools, if I understood you correctly, that are involved in the majority of the violence, or from 9 high schools, the majority of the students who are either injured or killed are from. And I was very surprised at the number of partnerships that you have, both non-traditional and traditional. There were 2 things that occurred in the overview that I heard from each of the speakers. One, when are parents involved in the process of partnering? That's one question. And I know that you mentioned, Larry, that you're working with PowerPack, and I know that's a parent advocacy organization. The other thing that I was struck too was the conversation I don't think starts early enough. I'm in early childhood. I have been in classrooms where children are already talking to me about their schema of the world when it comes to violence and police, or when it comes to arrest, or when it comes to how they view what happens in their communities. And so I think a part of what we have to think about is when we really start to intervene and start to talk about interrupting this sort of understanding of how the world works in the communities that are around those 9 high schools and in other communities. And so I would just suggest to you that I think the work that the police department is doing in terms of partnerships is great. I'm wondering if it is strategic in terms of if you're leveraging some of those programs both up the age range and down the age range, because what I'm seeing with kids in early childhood is they are already beginning to understand things about violence in their communities and police and law enforcement and justice in, I think, in some cases, very unhealthy ways. So it's just a suggestion that I know with Power Pack they work with very young children as well as older children, that perhaps some of these programs, I know with limited funding sometimes that's an issue, can be considered about where might we start having discussions with children about violence, about conflict resolution from the perspective of the police department.
Are you asking me for an answer to that? Yes, I'm very happy to. You know, and I'm really so personally uninvolved in education. I have no idea in terms of developmental stages, for instance, where it's appropriate to begin having those conversations. I can tell you that the gang resistance education and training curriculum, which does deal with some of those issues, there's actually 2 curricula. One is for younger kids, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. One for older kids, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. We've also imagined trying to modify that to help kids transition from elementary to high school, trying to give them an opportunity to start off well in high school, which is really kind of different than what you're suggesting. You know, there's so many needs, and I'll tell you that last year we taught about 15,000 kids in the city of Chicago, the great curriculum. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, it was 20,000. We have just lost some of our capacity because of loss in manpower. So a lot of needs, and I'll also just argue that we haven't always necessarily gone into the schools where that is most needed. We more frequently have gone into the schools where we've been invited, which isn't necessarily a good test of where we're needed. So I think there's plenty more we can do in that regard.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Nikki from UCAN, Nikki DeLimo from UCAN. I was really struck by Lisa's slide with the principal's quote about talking about the psychiatric hospital, and because it's fun for them there, and that at school they have to do math worksheets. And it made me just think of our young people and can school be fun for them? And is a worksheet a meaningful learning experience? And Victoria had talked about the youth voice. And is there research out there on having youth voices and how that might improve outcomes and learning experiences overall?
So I have a background in learning sciences, which trains me to think about how kids develop concepts. It trains me to think about cognition and the improvement of instruction and sort of traditional school outcomes of how we think about learning. I think one thing that's missing from that is the development perspective, the youth development perspective. And this is where I think there need to be partnerships between these areas of expertise and sort of perspectives on kids. at Chapin Hall, I've learned a lot about youth development. In the education world, we're starting to talk about this as non-academic factors, so it is getting attention within sort of the school improvement side of things. But again, there's a language problem. Some people talk about affective development, some talk about non-academic skills. Are we talking about the same thing, different things? Absolutely. I think that the value of the youth development perspective is that it really taps into those aspects of a person, their leadership, their compassion, their interest in knowing about others and about the world that are really important sort of to the learning process, and that also start to help us reimagine how kids might interact and should be interacting in schools so that it is a much richer experience for them. I'm doing observations in schools around a youth development program, and the idea is for the youth to talk to each other, and to explore their values relationships, and it's a pregnancy prevention project. I go into these classrooms, and the kids are sitting in chairs that are attached to these heavy desks in rows, facing forward, and it is impossible to have the flexibility for them to engage in the kinds of activities and discussions that are imagined by this curriculum. And so we really need to be thinking about these things. And so, we focus so much on academic achievement, but that's why I sort of talk about how the importance of getting down to learning experiences. We're really not talking about those kinds of things. And when you get down to there, you start getting into some of these developmental aspects as well.
Vicki, did you want to add to that?
I do. One of the things that I have found really wonderful is in starting our after-school clubs, it was actually, based on a needs assessment from the parents. But what it has allowed us to do is to really reach into what we think, I love the term, the learning experiences that Lisa is talking about. It's really about, we used the Hampton archives at the school to really help the kids be able to make their own documentaries about civil rights. And it transformed not only many of them their way of thinking about the civil rights movement and being able to use technology, but it allowed their teachers to see the possibilities. So sometimes if you enter into a way that is sort of like learning experiences that are not part of the school day, then you can look at the possibilities of learning and realize that it does happen. And then now that's integrated into the social studies curriculum for all students. So we're really trying to push on that, just to say, how do we, not from a top-down approach, say, we can no longer do math worksheets, because sometimes we do need to do math worksheets. But how do you really model good learning experiences and let the teachers experience and view their students in different ways? I think it's crucial.
Can I make one other comment? And this is why the partnership's important in the discussion, because I sort of said that, from a learning sciences, we have something to learn from the youth development perspective. It's true from the youth development perspective. When I go and I watch some of these, this youth development program, my perspective coming at it from a person who's really interested in academic rigor and believes in the intellectual ability of kids, this is too easy for them. It's too easy. Why are you doing this with them? They're capable of more. It's obvious they're capable of more. So that's why we've sort of got to put the perspectives together.
So this question reminds me of something Larry said about the number of interactions with truants, which I think you cited as 35,000 a year, which raises a question of the kids who are not in the school or not there very often, and how to think about them and how partnerships relate to them. If we're only partnering with the school that's only focused on the kids who are there, so how do we think about those truants and what partners are needed to bring them back into the fold.
You're going to get me on a roll with this.
Okay, good.
You know, what happens, I've had to research this. When a police officer picks up a kid who's truant, the officer by law can only take the kid home or to the school. In both cases, not much happens to improve the situation that caused that kid to be truant. Chicago Public Schools is developing some re-engagement centers right now, which will have a series of services that can help kids get reconnected to school in a real way. But we can't bring those kids that we pick up truant to the re-engagement centers for some reasons that the lawyers can explain to you, but I can't. But I found myself thinking, and you know what happens, a kid is in trouble and he gets back to the school and they say, "Oh, you again." And the kid says, "Oh, you again," and the kid books and he's gone. And that's our re-engagement with truants. And so why don't we kind of meld those two? And why don't these schools have their own re-engagement center? Why doesn't every school have a re-engagement center? Kid comes in, there's an evaluation, what's going on, what broken relationships related to that kid leaving, get the people in the broken relationships together, get the kid the supports he or she needs to get back into school responsibly. It doesn't happen. It sounds so obvious to me, but it doesn't happen.
Vicki, has this issue come up in your work? Are you...
We do. Usually it comes up and it's labeled as our frequent flyers, the ones who have had repeated incidences of disciplinary referrals and have been suspended from school. So, you know, at the middle school, we're working with 25 of the students who were suspended 7 times last year. And there is no system in place for them to even have in-school suspension. These are out-of-school suspensions. So it became very obvious when you just look at attendance data and these kind of referral data that these students are not being served. And so it became obvious to start saying, whenever we're looking at persistence problems of practice, this should be one we're addressing. And there have been, but it's also a very sensitive issue of like how to be really responsive to the students and build that system. And I would say we're on a learning curve. We have had a number of successes and a number that have not been successful. And it is about getting the right partners to the table.
And Vicki, isn't it the case that about, 1/2 to 2/3 of those kids are homeless or
Yes.
in homeless shelters? So this is a larger issue related to their families and supports that their families need.
By those kids, you mean the kids who are multiply suspended?
Yes, the ones who are multiply suspended.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to comment, just from my work in the schools, this frequent flyers, I think there are some other terms. School staff tend to know who these kids are, and the lack of a strategy, the lack of services and resources to really respond to these kids effectively it's just extremely apparent. There are other things in place in schools. There's anger management, there's trauma interventions, but a lot of those services are really for kids who can benefit from them. And some of these kids, at least according to social workers and counselors I speak with, they sort of don't have a baseline in place to really benefit. I don't know the full story, but I think there's a real issue of providing services for what we call high need kids, and it's only going to happen through partnerships.
And I also think, you know, the slide that you put up from the principal really speaks to the fact of that it has to be targeted. Mm-hmm. You know, it has to be just in time and targeted. That other just generalized programming is not going to be the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Good morning. I'm Cristina Pacioni-Zayas from the Latino Policy Forum. I'm just curious, in all of your research experiences and the case studies that you're presenting, what's been the reaction of teachers in terms of cultivating these partnerships, and how do we, after teachers go through a teacher education program and they're in the field, what can schools do to support the development of partnerships between teachers and community-based organizations or social service agencies?
Vicki, do you want to start with that?
Sure, I will start. I do think, again, as has been echoed in the room, it's important to have the teacher as a research partner and to do the design-based implementation research or the action research where they are able to be looking at the same, that you're solving the same problem together. We walked into a school situation where the teachers felt very demoralized, and I just think we're in a state in our country in education where teachers are sort of seen as the problem so many times. And so it really takes kind of sitting with the teachers and developing this plan where they feel empowered. And with some teachers that happens quickly, and with others it takes time and for them to get on board. And so we have a building leadership team of teachers, and they really identify the problems and often have the solution of where the partnerships could be. We do have the Wyman Teen Leadership program embedded in the school now in the social studies curriculum. And that was identified for one of the teachers, saying we really need this kind of program, not after school, but during the school day. But it is, as I say, if anything, it's a take-home lesson that this takes a lot of work and a lot of time. And I don't think we can keep bringing programs to teachers and saying this is a solution. It's building it with them.
I just want to make a quick point. I don't have a lot of experience working directly with schools, but I'm reminded of some experiences I had with high schools in Englewood and how uninvolved community and parents are with the schools. And my question is, are there personnel in the schools whose job it is to try and connect with people in the community and try and bring the community in and try and bring the parents in and create the partnerships that we all think are so important? My guess is that CPS doesn't have people in the schools that have that as a responsibility, and that they're fairly inward focused on the school culture and not on better connecting with supports in the community. If somebody wants to correct me, I'm happy to be corrected, but I wish we had something like that.
There was the mentoring and advocacy program that was...
Wait for the microphone if you can.
But
And then
it's
we'll
no
go
longer
to the back there. Could you just repeat that into the microphone in case people didn't hear you?
Sure. Chicago did once have the mentoring and advocacy program, which was targeting high-risk youth, and it was widely successful, but funding issues.
Wouldn't you like to see a dean of community relations at every school?
Right.
There's a dean of discipline, there's a dean of whatever, a dean of community relations.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on that because prior to being with the Latino Policy Forum, I worked at Roberto Clemente Community Academy as the Culture of Calm coordinator. And as you all may know, Culture of Calm was a district-wide violence prevention initiative that was started by Huberman and funded by ARA. And the funds ran dry, and therefore the program is no longer in existence unless the specific principal decided to build that into the budget if they had that kind of luxury. That's the issue. And I mean, I think that's a huge policy implication in terms of funding, because when it comes down to it, you know, as Larry's suggesting, the community connector piece is huge. what goes on outside of the school really impacts learning and outcomes within the school walls. And the more we reach out and the more we extend, the better we have an opportunity to really just, leverage resources and bring in our partners and wrap around our kids, essentially. And that's kind of like one of the questions I was going to ask, actually, Vicki. How can universities navigate or mitigate what's going on, like when school districts are under pressure to deliver quantitative outcomes? Because a lot of what you were referencing with the outcomes is kind of qualitative, and that's incredibly important. I am a qualitative researcher, but when it comes down to it, does that really speak to the bottom line? Can we quantify those outcomes when districts are looking at us and saying, okay, well, how's that impacting test scores? How's that impacting growth and whatnot? And I'm just wondering, how can universities that partner with schools kind of fortify these schools and sort of, quote unquote, have their back when the district comes after them in terms of the quantitative outcomes?
We do have statisticians working very closely with us and providing, really listening to the questions and providing evidence for those. So at Brittany Woods Middle School in University City, we have had a 22% increase over the last two years of test scores. But if you really look at doing a regression analysis with those, you're able to show what are the mediating factors that have really weighed into that 22% increase, and what other factors. And it's interesting because you're really able to disaggregate and show that it really isn't based on the socioeconomic status of the students. It really is about attendance and about providing targeted support. But we do find that we have put in accountability systems that the university has paid for. So both at KIP and at our partner schools, we have NWEA benchmark data that we correlate and see how it works with the state testing in terms of predictability. So it's a reality that we have faced, that we're interested in the how and the why, but we also have to really respect the fact that they are held to the accountability of the quantitative standardized testing. And so it's luckily, again, we have faculty on staff that are interested in these questions, so it can become part of their research, and it can be a service that we provide for them. I hope that helps.
A couple of these questions, as well as comments from the panel, talk about the problem of the one-time grant. We get some money, we build a partnership, the grant goes away. Vicki talked about the importance of other resources to fill gaps or to glue things together. Another thing that comes up a lot is the question of sustainability. When you get a grant, the funder is immediately saying, figure out how you're going to now sustain this, because I'm going to back away at some point. So in the absence of resources, which Vicki, I think you're saying are coming from the university in this case, how can your typical school think about sustainability and keeping partnerships alive as grants come and go and particular focus comes and goes?
Well, at every meeting with the provost and our chancellor, I talk about that it is not possible. That the reality is, if you do not have a basic infrastructure in place that provides the continuity, then we really are all about individual programs and individual sort of initiatives that do not get coordinated, and then you have the Christmas tree approach to the work. So I'm not going to be able to solve the problem as how, except to say it's really crucial, but you can do it with a pretty minimum level of resourcing once you have the structures in place and really highly qualified, motivated people that believe in the mission.
I'd like to, if I could.
Go ahead.
Just address this and also go back to the question of teachers. There's a great need, first of all, I think with teachers, they're working with the kids. They know all about this. We're in an environment of no excuses. So teachers can't really talk about the kinds of thing that principal talked about. And I think the principal was going a bit off script in talking about the needs of the students the way that she did, because they're really supposed to be focused on sort of English and math and instruction. I did a workshop with my colleague at a school with a bunch of teachers because the principal said, we're having all of this professional development about improving academics. It's really the affective domain. It's so important and we have to address it. We went and we did a workshop and teachers just aren't talked to about this. And we talked to them about trauma. We described trauma. We're not clinicians ourselves, but they started shifting their understanding of their students and what may be happening with their students, and they really wanted to know more. There's an enormous need for professional development around the issues that these kids are facing and how that translates into the behavior that they're seeing in the classroom. So that actually is one piece of the sustainability. The discussion paper that I wrote with my colleagues talks about a program. We did not see those resources invested in professional development to help the teachers understand what was going on with those kids. So when those resources went away, poof, everything was gone. Had those resources been invested in a smart way in professional development, that really would have left something behind with those individual teachers. They care about their kids, and we need to start from that position of knowing that they care about them. They need more strategies to work with them. I think the other thing that's important about teachers is they too are partners in all of this. So during the teachers' strike, the teachers' union was saying, we need more social workers, we need more social workers. Yes, you need more social workers, but the teachers have to be working in partnership with the social workers. Too often you go into schools, the social workers feel like they're just being sent all of the problem kids, and then it becomes their problem to deal with the kids. So really, within a school building, it has to be a partnership of the leadership, of the teachers, of the social workers, of the agencies. They all have to be working together, and it can't be sort of a, this is not my problem, this is your problem approach to things.
Time for a couple of more questions. Let's go with this one.
Hi, my name is Pam Cook. I'm a licensed clinical social worker with a history in child welfare with adolescent females, pregnant and parent teens as well. Speaking about teachers, this is a critical issue because I had a lot of clients who were in CPS schools who were going to school, but based on their behavior in the classrooms, clashing with teachers, being sent home, me going back trying to work things out. So I think, and professional development, of course, but what are universities who have education programs doing to address this up front before these teachers get in the classrooms? The urban teacher is facing an enormous challenge that Naperville students, teachers do not face. A whole nother layer of education that if you're going into an urban school, you can't go in there unarmed. So what are universities doing, if anything, to address in the education of teachers before we get to the classroom?
Unarmed with social work skills, right?
Exactly.
Okay, just wanted Larry to know that that's what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to be misplaced by teachers, but you're right, that partnership is so critical that they have to have some skills to go with that.
Well, I'm going to say very briefly, I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area, and I think training programs for urban teachers, some of the ones that are at the forefront, are starting to get into that area. They are just starting to get there. They know it's not enough to teach the teachers how, it's not enough to focus just on excellent literacy instruction or excellent math instruction and how do kids learn and think about math and literacy. So they're just starting. But, there's some interesting things happening at Washington University in the Brown School, and the students who are attracted to the Brown School and why they're attracted to the Brown School. And maybe Vicki can speak to some of that.
Well, I think, again, as Lisa says, we're really at the beginning of understanding what are some of the possibilities and the strategies. The University of Missouri St. Louis also has been working with the Brown School to try to develop internship programs for teachers. The idea is, first of all, to get them in classrooms as early as possible, but also to get them in other agencies as early as possible and do internships and really learn from experts in social work and in youth and child development. And we just have started this program 2 years ago, and I think, again, we're getting good feedback from it. Also, principals, really thinking about principal leadership, it's the same thing. If you don't have somebody who has a strong understanding of how to bring in resources and align them and be collaborative. As a leader, I think also we run the same problems that teachers want to do this work but then are not able to. So it's definitely the strong programs, I think, are understanding and recognizing this need.
And I just, at the Brown School, I believe about 25% of the students are coming in from programs like Teach for America and other kinds of service programs. So they're really coming in with some very interesting backgrounds, and they're not interested in sort of the traditional counselor school role. They're really thinking, how can I contribute to a school, but not from a teaching perspective? And these people like this can actually play a very valuable role within a school building in terms of supporting teachers in their understanding and working with teachers. So it's sort of like we got some good ingredients there, and it's really understanding what they are and developing them further. And
Yeah, I think some of the funds are coming from places like high school placement in our charter schools. You have an individual who is in charge of high school placement, but that individual actually is playing the community liaison role. Mm-hmm. So they understand the importance of working with the other agencies and take it above and beyond the traditional role of just making sure that the students have a strong sort of place to go after the middle school into the high school setting, but also thinking about community partnerships. It's been interesting.
Good. I think to close us down, I will ask each of our panelists if they have any final statement or recommendation. I hope everyone realizes and is not too disappointed that we didn't, in this forum, solve this problem. This was what we hoped was that we were continuing and enhancing an ongoing conversation, and I think from what our panel has said, from the comments from the audience, we see that there's a long agenda here. There's some recent successes and some promises of a brighter future, but still a lot of work to do. Lisa, Larry, Vicki, any final words that you would like to share?
No, I think I've said a lot, and I think you summed it up very well.
Larry, Vicki?
I'm just reminded of that comment I made early on about how we all need to work together for kids to be connected in school, to pro-social peers, to their families, to their communities. And I believe that the strength of those bonds is probably directly relating to their success in life and or the lack of. And so that's why we need to be working together in partnerships that we have talked about today, and why we need those partnerships to sometimes turn into coalitions. Organizational support, trying to work on those problems of connectivity that those kids have. That's my one final comment.
Vicki, a final word?
Well, I just, again, want to really thank Lisa and Chapin Hall for bringing up the topic and the dialogue. I started my research and my life as a biochemist, so I have a real affinity for mechanisms. And I love how to understand how things work. And I think, she really hit the point whenever she's talking about the dialogue. So I'd like to continue the dialogue past the session. So thank you very much.
Very good, and the dialogue will continue, we hope. This will be posted on the Chapin Hall website. You can get access to the slides that were shared here and contact information for the panelists. So we hope, again, that this is not a one-time conversation, but a piece of an ongoing one, because I think, as everyone listening on the web and in the room knows, our youth really deserve more than they are getting at this point, and there are resources that can be pulled together in better ways to do that. So thanks for spending part of your morning with us. Thanks again to the panel, and we look forward to seeing you at future Chapin Hall forums.